Longbow needed extensive training to use, and this was part of the reason it was not widely adopted across Europe.
Oh, wait. Yes, it was widely adopted. Oh my gosh, what is he talking about? I just did this. No, it was widely adopted across Europe. It's just that the English were particularly good at it and could draw higher poundage bows. So they were better archers, and because then more in the population were strong enough to be able to draw even more powerful bows. But no, longbows were a thing all over Europe.
And recognized the true value of the weapon, passing laws encouraging regular archery practice, and even put in place taxation to help with the funding of the special wood needed to make them.
Correct.
To show the importance the English placed on the military value of the longbow, at its peak during the medieval era, it was typical that an English army would be made up of over half its number in longbowmen.
And more than that if you look at 1415 at Battle of Agincourt.
The longbow was accurate up to about 250 feet, but in good conditions and fired by experienced archers, an arrow could reach a range of nearly 1,000 feet. Though accuracy was only effective if fired en masse at these kinds of distances.
Okay, I know what you're thinking. I know, because you call me pedantic, but you're pedantic too. You are there typing saying, he said fired, there is no fire involved. So I'm voicing you right now. Don't you dare call me pedantic. I'm voicing you. You all thought it, and you know that. You know it. Tell me I'm wrong in the comments. You thought it. Also, accuracy is also another thing, because usually longbowmen in an English way, but in general in the medieval way, they're precision shooters. A lot of the times when we look at iconography, you can tell that they are aiming, they're shooting a point blank, and they're not like, oh, let's throw as many random arrows into the mix and hope for the best from an enormous distance. Occasionally that did happen, but in general, an archer, I would say by default, is a precision striker. We could put it this way.
When used in a large formation of rank upon rank of longbowmen, they could be a devastating and effective force, as proved at Crécy in 1346 and again at Agincourt in 1415, where both times the English heavily defeated the French by firing massive volleys of arrows in coordinated unison. It was found that the best tactic suited to using these kinds of archers was to deploy them in large groups and use them like artillery, pounding the advancing enemy with wave after wave of arrows raining down on them from high above. In some situations, longbowmen were able to fire between 3 to 6 arrows per minute and were often given between 60 and 72 arrows for the duration of the battle. However, this would require a large level of physical exertion, and archers would rarely attempt this firing rate. In contrast, a crossbow, favored by a lot of European armies, could only fire at a fraction of this rate.
Continental. Also, I would say there is a response to that in the sense that it's true that the rate of fire is higher with archers when compared to a single crossbowman, but oftentimes if you look at professional crossbowmen, like such as for example the Genoese crossbowmen, then you have a reloader. So in other words, your rate of fire can be increased and sped up when you're using a crossbow, because by the time you have shot your crossbow, the reloader has reloaded the other crossbow, passes you the second crossbow, and while they reload that, you have one ready to shoot and you shoot again. It's a little retinue, if you will. So that needs to be taken into consideration, the way these weapons were tactically used, particularly by professionals. So there is that. And yeah, there are a lot of pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages. Of course, the crossbow relies on the strength of the weapon to create the poundage needed for penetration and maximum damage output, whereas the bow uses the strength of the bowmen. So but what that means is that it translates to the fact that yes, you may have a higher rate of fire, as you were saying, but you do need many years to train a longbowman, and you can effectively train a crossbowman in a matter of weeks. Between 2 to 4, in fact, would be standard in Europe. So I would say there are pros and cons, but when we look at the rate of fire as one of the pros of the longbow, do keep in mind that there are ways to reduce that difference between a crossbow and how many times per minute you can shoot, and a longbow and how many times per minute you can shoot. Not to mention, a lot of the times it's better to be tactical with your shots.
Archers were vulnerable to hand-to-hand combat, as they were lightly armed and armored. To counter this, they would be placed behind a defensive line of infantry, or a natural defensive geographical feature like a slope or purpose-built ditches.
Right.
At first, longbowmen were using the highly...
Man, the ditches man will be proud of this statement. Yes, or even stakes, like they were showing, something like this was used. It usually was to counter cavalry, though. When it comes to hand-to-hand combat, archers could do that pretty well. And often archers are decently armored. Once again, it's anecdotal, as I was saying, because it depends on the army we are examining.